see you all again. Announcement number one, please remember that the quiz is due tomorrow, quiz number 3. So if you haven't done it, please get it done. And announcement number 2, ignore that. Well, I sent out the wrong email. It's for another class, but I did send you an email about the change in the schedule, right? I sent you the change in schedule, and I put it on the announcements. However, I'll have to give you a hard copy on next Tuesday. I'm sorry, I screwed up the printing. For some reason, I kept putting the classes together, and when I printed out the paper, one side is for the schedule for one class, and then the other side has my email with the thing about changing, or as an email I sent to another class, and the other side has the revised schedule for us. Actually, is what I meant to say. On the same piece of paper, so it's totally confusing and wrong, of course. So I have to reprint it. So I apologize for that. But it's in the email and it's in the announcements. I just changed the schedule a little bit, tweaked it a little bit. So take a look at that. Please do the readings. Because I do want to talk. Hello, sir. Mr. Gaines, yes. Good to see you, sir. Let's see. All right, Native American Heritage Month, Mr. Gaines. So I'm going to talk about Catholics. We're also Americans, and we're also natives who are on their way to sainthood. Actually, in the case of this fine woman, she's already a saint. So I'm starting at the top. She's Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. Kateri in her native language is the name word for Catherine. So you also call her Saint Catherine Tekakwitha. Saint Kateri Tekakwitha, who lived around 1656 and died in 1680. Okay? In what is now the state of New York. So going by my principle, like with St. Juniper Serra, yeah, he was in California, even though it's part of the kingdom or the Spanish Empire at the time. It's part of Mexico, the Spanish Empire. It later became the United States after it was its own republic and then joined. So, okay, she was in what later became with the boundaries, the state of New York, even though at the time, 1600s, I think it was northern New York. We had a mixture. You had the French up in Canada. That was theirs. And then you had what was the South, which was mostly the British, although there were other groups. Like here, just a little down here by Philadelphia. In Camden in New Jersey. Swedes. The Swedes had colonies here in southern New Jersey and Philly. Swedish kingdom. Oldest house in New Jersey was part of the Swedish colony. I think it's down by Camden. However, it's Swedish, it was part of the Swedish colony, but the people who built it were Finns. Because I think Finland was part of the Swedish kingdom at the time in the 1600s. So they were actually ethnically Finns, but technically Finns, but Swedes as well. So anyway. How you doing? She was an Algonquin Mohawk Indian. Mohawk Indian, which is close to my heart because my niece is a Mohawk Indian. And St. Kateri was the daughter of a chief. Her father was a chief amongst the Mohawks, so that made her kind of important within the group. She was not a Christian. Her parents weren't Christian. She wasn't raised Christian. But she eventually became a Christian convert. Sometime in her life, there was a smallpox epidemic in the region where they were, and she got smallpox. Didn't kill her, thanks be to God, but it did damage her skin. I guess that's what smallpox does. You get lesions or sores or whatever on your skin. So her face was very scarred and pockmarked from the smallpox infection. And that's probably why I would imagine they called her Tekakwitha, or Tekakwitha was her nickname. It's she who bumps into things. She who bumps into things. So I guess it affected her eyesight. Maybe she was clumsy. Maybe she was just clumsy, or maybe the smallpox also got into her eyes and she couldn't see very well, so she knocked into stuff. So nice to know that the Native Americans had a sense of humor. Kind of a gallows sense of humor, I guess you'd say. Yeah. She who bumps into things. Tekakwitha. At 19, she converted to Christianity. She encountered some Christian missionaries, probably from the French, I would imagine. Jesuits, the Society of Jesus, and she heard the message of Christianity, liked it, and wanted to become a Christian, which didn't necessarily go over well with her tribe. And when she became a Christian, she took a vow of virginity, so she vowed to never get married, to live her life as a single woman, which again, in tribal systems is not really common. It's not particularly welcome that you have single people in the community because everyone has to, the idea, the expectation is that you procreate, you have children to expand the tribe, make it bigger. Not have children. So that was not taken, again, that wasn't welcomed very much by her parents because she wasn't doing her cultural duty, So this is what Christianity does to people. It ruins our cultures, makes children not do what they're supposed to. Anyways, so people didn't apparently like her very much, and they thought she was a witch in her local community. So she had to leave, and she went to live in the Jesuit mission. She was farther north. I guess it might have been in Canada or near Canada, but anyways. So the Jesuits set up missions too, just like Junipero Serra and the Franciscans did, which, I know they have it's a bad memory for a lot of Native Americans nowadays, and they're looked upon negatively. But, that wasn't why they were founded. They were for the protection of the mission. They weren't there to oppress the natives or destroy cultures. I think mainly they were there to protect the missionaries from getting killed, or at least let them have some place to go where they could find food and water and community. But it became also a refuge for Native Americans who converted because they just weren't understood. They were now outsiders. They were belonging to this weird belief system that they never heard of before, and doing weird things like taking vows of virginity. So they weren't following the customs of the ancestors. So she fled there, and she was apparently just a good holy woman. Okay. She apparently slept on a bed of thorns as penance. Saints do these types of things. I mean, it's not generally recommended by the church, but sometimes saints do kind of weird things. To make their lives uncomfortable, and then they can offer up the discomfort or the pain as a penance for their sins or for the souls of other people who are suffering. And she wanted her relatives to convert to Christianity, so that's why she was doing it, praying for them. So she did that. And she just died a natural death as far as I know. I'd have to look it up. I don't think she died of anything just natural. I think she died naturally. I'd have to look to see if there's anything. But I know she wasn't killed. But anyways, she did die. Her last words are recorded as, "Jesus, Mary, I love you." Very sweet for me. I think they're beautiful, beautiful last words. And a miracle occurred. The pock marks, the damage, the scars all over her face disappeared on her corpse. Completely went away that she had for most of her life. So that was seen as an indication that, she might have been a saint, someone blessed by God. Anywho, 1885, it took until 1885 before the Catholic Church even opened her process for becoming a saint. And it languished there. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, she was always Blessed Kateri because one of the local churches was named after her, Blessed Kateri. But finally, in 2012, took them long enough, under Pope Benedict XVI, they canonized her and declared her a saint, Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. And she's the first Native American woman of North America to be a saint. The South America has had saints before, but for North America, she's the first Native woman, and maybe the first Native American of North America, I think, Catholic to be declared a saint. So she's got that going for her. So I ask for her prayers for us in this course, and for all the Native Americans in our country, that God may bless them. Amen. Amen. Let's see. Is religion violent? Of course it's violence. Does it have to be violent? There we go. Back to the good stuff. Killing, maiming, causing suffering. Yes. Okay. Something I like to just throw out there about religion, assumption that people have, is not always a correct assumption, but, religion might be a good way for explaining, it might even be perhaps the best way of explaining the meaning of life and the purpose of our existence. Maybe. Maybe that's what religion does well. Okay? I think. I don't think that religion is the best explanation for how the world works, though. Get my drift? No? Well, no. Is anybody with me? You with Miss Cook? Got me? With me? All right. Thank you, Miss Cook. I already feel like there's a leak in the boat and I'm sinking. Whoop, whoop, whoop. All hands on deck. Get the lifeboats. Well, there's only one lifeboat, so it's for me. No, and I think, how does that, let me repeat that. I think religion is not the best explanation for how the world works. And maybe, but I do think it is its role, or it is maybe the best tool or thing for giving meaning to human existence and to the purpose of the world. Why the world is, why it exists. And then you'd have to sort out amongst the religions which has the truest picture of what the world really is. Well, how do you know? Well, look at what does tell us how the world works, like the natural sciences. I mean, I don't think, I don't look for the Bible, or I don't think religion is the place to look for the mechanism of the universe. So, I don't look in my Bible to find out, whether I should accept that there are black holes or not, or gravity or whatever, certain scientific principles and stuff like that. Some people do. They look for these things in the scriptures, try to find them. But I don't think that's what the Bible is for, or even religion. I don't look to the Pope of Rome or the Archbishop of Philadelphia to verify for me whether biological evolution is a legitimate hypothesis, whether it's got some legs on it. No pun intended. A fish with legs, Even though they might have opinions about it. I remember when I was in the seminary, well, one of the many seminaries I got into and tried to get what's happening. Asked to leave or leaving, but those are other stories. But this was up in Scranton, Diocese of Scranton, the seminary. This is for a more traditional group. They did the whole Latin Mass and all that kind of stuff, which I liked. It was nice. I had a good time there, very nice people. They had a boys' school as well, which I did not like. High school, and that's a little hell. I noticed, I look at my students, on on their website, I can see the students are in the class, I tell them information about you and what, I like to see what my students are majoring in, so at least I can, kind of gear or, craft my information in that direction, since I have a lot of athletes, or if I have a lot of people doing sciences, or business, whatever, so I can kind of make So I know that some people are doing, education. I think all of them are doing like early childhood education, all my education students. And I'm like, yeah, that's the way to go. Keep them young when they're cute and beautiful and still innocent in a way. Don't get them when they're 15 and 17. You want to stop living. No? Am I lying? People were just in it, right? Am I lying? Did your teachers go home every day with a smile on their face? Were they out of there as soon as the bell hit like 2:33? No, you don't know.
I wasn't there with him.
You weren't there with them?
I didn't drive home with him on my first home.
Oh, that's true. Did you drive or did you take the bus?
I mean, when I was able to drive, I drove.
Yeah. What? I know. What? Not taking any notes, and
It's right here.
Huh. What is that?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just kind of messing around with that. I have notes. It's great.
Well, hold on a second. Let me see what you wrote. May I look at it? Okay, but that's from the PowerPoint. Why don't you just download the PowerPoint?
I wrote what you said.
Well, I didn't say that yet. You didn't say that at all. Religion, okay, no, but I didn't say that. I said it is the best explanation for existence. It's not the best explanation for how the world works. How the world works, the mechanics of the universe. You know? So yeah, when I was in the seminary, this was in the mid-90s or the later 90s. I had a good time there. But I remember this is, Pope John Paul II, Pope St. John Paul II, when he was still alive. And he made some statement, he gave an audience to a group of people, made some statement about, that got reported in the papers about, said something like evolution seems to be more than a hypothesis. Okay? It seems to be valid in a way. It's almost like putting his stamp of approval on it. A lot of people saw it that way. And that showed up on the board there, because as I said, these more traditional types who still have some question marks after biological evolution. I don't like the Pope said that, but whatever, I don't care. And I looked at it, I'm like, okay, but that's fine. I mean, that was his opinion. That's right. He's Pope. No, isn't he Pope of the oracle of God? He's got a direct line from God. No. No, he's not. I know people kind of treat the Pope that way, or bishops that way, but, they have their field of expertise, which is they are authorities, religious authorities. If a bishop doesn't know history or doesn't know science or doesn't even know how to read or write, say, it doesn't mean he's not a bishop if he's ordained. He still has that grace of office, that charisma. Okay, but I'm not going to ask him to try and teach me how to spell or something if he can't read or write, I'm not going to ask him to teach me mathematics if he stinks at math, So, I'm glad the Pope St. John Paul II was able to say that, but, it doesn't matter one iota. It doesn't make it true. Because that's not within the purview of religion, in my view. Well, even the church teaches this. That's not within the purview. The church teaches the truths of salvation. How the world works is a whole other thing. The world as a system, as a machine, okay. Because throughout human history, and let's say the last 2,000 years of the church existing, Christianity, people have had a whole lot of different ideas about how the world worked. And Christianity, the church, worked with all of them. Because the bishops, the popes, they didn't see that as their job. Okay? It was a salvation of souls, proclaiming the message that Jesus has risen from the dead. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling death by death. And to those in the tombs granting life. Thank you. Appreciate it. That's the message of the church. Christ, Jesus Christ, who was truly killed, was brought back to life physically brought back to life by God. And that affects us all now because we will all live because of it. That's the message of Christianity. That's it. It's like McDonald's is hamburgers and shakes. I don't care whatever else they have up there on the board. They've got tons of stuff nowadays, right? But what did it start out as? A hamburger stand and shakes. If McDonald's ever forgets that that's what its business is, McDonald's will go out of business. Just like with any business. If you forget what you're doing, or you pivot and you start doing something else, find something else to sell to people. If the church ever forgets that that's her message and suddenly, thinks that it's like, the Academy of Sciences or something. Now the church is going to tell you whether the earth goes around the sun or the sun is stationary the sun goes around the earth, which some church did try to do. And during some periods of time, Galileo being the most famous example, yes, Your Holiness, I accept your preaching the gospel message. I will listen with an open heart, but you're not an astronomer. So let's ask the astronomers whether the sun is stationary or not, or the earth is moving or not. Because I don't think, unless the Pope is an astronomer. And the popes know this because, they have the popes established academies of science to advise them. There is a papal observatory. It was built, I forget when it was it 1800s or 1700s. Someone wants to give me that date, I'll give you an extra credit point. I forget whether it was the 1700s or 1800s that some pope had an observatory so they could look at the stars. Because the popes knew they weren't astronomers, but they knew Catholics who were. So they recognized that religion might not be the best explanation of the mechanics of our world. It doesn't tell us about quantum physics or big bangs or stuff like that in the Bible. And that's okay for my brothers and sisters who are looking for those things. I don't lose 1 minute of sleep because I can't find dinosaurs in the book of Genesis. We look to the natural sciences, yes? You look to the natural sciences. We have brains to think with, to make decisions, to make judgments. We have our senses to experience things, okay? To take in data and interpret it. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean you can't be an astronomer, to continue the astronomy metaphor, at your observatory looking for black holes, and you got the Bible right next to you on your desk, from when you're taking a break. You're waiting for the data to come in. Okay, I'll read the first letter of John. Why not? I just see no problem with that. I wouldn't see a problem with it if I were an astronomer. So we rightly look to the natural sciences for what is natural. And as they've shown, they usually give the best explanation. The best explanation. Notice not the correct explanation. The best explanation for what we're seeing is going on in the world. Like what we see is that the sun moves, right? Mr. Dobson, the sun moves, it seems to move through the sky, right? But it's really us moving around the sun, okay? But, actually, so you could say, well, no, they were wrong in the ancient world when they assumed the sun was moving. It doesn't move. The earth is moving. But now we know, and we have modern science, and it gave us the best explanation, but a lot of people, even in science, it can become like religion in a way. You think it's the only correct one, but no, that's not true, because maybe, 200 years ago when modern science came into existence and people started making telescopes, the first telescopes, and looking at the planets and the stars and the sun. And even in the last 100 years or so, maybe 150 years, I guess, when we've had better telescopes and things to study the universe. If you ask an astronomer before, does the sun move? They're like, no, it's stationary. But we're in a universe, right? A galaxy within the universe, right? And we're moving in the galaxy, aren't we? Or are we just stationary in the galaxy? Well, People in the 700s wouldn't have even known about that. They didn't know about galaxies. But we know that they exist now. And we know that, yeah, the sun is moving. It's orbiting around the black hole at the center of our galaxy. So the sun is moving. So the ancient peoples were actually, they made an assumption that was actually right. The sun does move. It doesn't move around the earth. They were wrong about that, but they were actually right without knowing that they were right. And the people who said, no, the earth is moving and the sun is stationary, they were actually wrong, but not really wrong. Because yes, the sun in our solar system, the star that we're bound to, is the star that we orbit. So it appears stationary to us because we can't see the wider galaxy that we're moving through. But now that we can with telescopes and stuff like that, we know now that the sun is moving and we're moving with it. We're moving around it. The sun is moving through this galaxy. And the galaxy is moving through the universe. Our galaxy is moving as well. Okay. What does this have to do with violence? Well, if we look for, I think if we look for answers from religion that it's not meant to give or shouldn't be meant to give, that can disturb people. You know, and it can start arguments about things that maybe we shouldn't be having arguments over. You know? So we're not trying to like burn the school down because they want to teach Darwinism or something, you know, or throw people in prison for teaching biological evolution in the science class. Or on the other hand, overthrow the government because they won't let us teach creationism or argue. I'm a creationist, but not in this sense. You know, they won't teach biblical creationism. Let's put it that way. In their schools. Something to think about. Fritz Graf. Hopefully you've looked at, I think I have it in the syllabus, his article on violence in the Encyclopedia of Religion. And he says, this quote, religion is the most powerful symbolic system that humans have developed. Okay, it's the most powerful symbol that we've ever created. Okay, that sounds right to me. Can't think of anything better than religion that people kind of pour all their hopes and dreams and wants and desires into. Okay. Sometimes politics, maybe more politics nowadays than religion. Okay. But in the past, I think in a lot of cultures, it was religion where you find most of the symbols as a symbolic system with everything. There was no differentiations. I told you when we talked about the word religion, people just didn't think in the terms that we think today. They didn't think in the terms of a religious world and a secular world that are either separate or even distinct. Okay? There's simply the world, which includes humans, but it includes other forms of life, like animals, but other forms of life, like ghosts and demons and gods, fairies, you know? Yeah, stuff like that. Just didn't think of it, you know, they didn't make that division. So, you know, went to vote the other day. Oh, I meant to send you a picture of me. I took a picture of myself and Ms. Cook after I went to vote. What it's worth. Anyways. Yeah, and if you went, you know, they don't ask you to do anything religious. Of course, they would not. They're forbidden. But yeah, I mean, you know, when you when you participated in ancient Roman government, the ancient Roman Republic, you know, you might throw something into a bowl of incense, you know, to the fire to honor the gods of Rome as you're walking into the Senate. You know, you're going to take a swearing oath to one of the gods, maybe the god of justice, as you're about to be not a witness, but a juror in a trial or something, like that. People thought nothing of it. You know, it made perfect sense. You have to acknowledge the gods because they're just there, just part of existence. It's only with the modern period that people started saying, really not recognizing. There's more about manipulation. There's more they're like, we have to get religion out of here. How do we do it? And we start coming up with this idea of the secular versus the sacred. Okay, the secular and religion. And the secular is just reality without religion. Religion has no voice. You don't base anything on religious principles, and then religion is this. You base it on religious principles. And the two should be kept. But then well, what do? If you have a society, well, the secular is the community. It's okay to have a secular community, group of people. But religion has to be kept individual. Keep it to yourself, right? Religion is supposed to be kept to yourself. You might meet together as a group, but when you go out into the secular, the larger group, you're not a group anymore. It's religion is particular. Yes? So they start making that distinction. Okay, and then the reason was because a lot of these people, they were anti-religious, anti-the church, whatever church they were living in, either the Catholic Church, but the Church of England or whatever. A lot of the early modern thinkers and philosophers. That's just what was going on. Okay, you can verify it with like Dr. Messina or Dr. Cluis, who know the history of philosophy better than I do. But that seems to have been what was going on. It wasn't just pure like, hey, a light went on and they're like, yeah, this makes sense. No, they made it make sense because they didn't want to live in that kind of society anymore where religion and religion was so intertwined with everything. They wanted to make a case for separating it out and then getting rid of it ultimately. But that hasn't happened yet. They're hoping. Anyways, so religion is essentially important to how humans view themselves and the world. Okay? So, as such, it makes sense to me that, it should pervade every aspect of human conduct. If it's part of how we make sense of our world and it's part of how humans are walking through this world, well, part of being a human is the experience of violence. In fact, one might even argue that that's like our primordial experience, our first order experiences of violence. One of them, I should say, because you're in your mother's womb, right? But how do you come out of it? Right, Mr. Moon? How do you come out of the womb? Is it all peaceful and painless and happy times for the mother or the baby? No. Huh? What? Yeah. I've never personally witnessed a birth. I've just seen stuff in movies where they're reenacting it. Or I've seen, I did see a cesarean section once, which from an old surgery film from the 1920s and 30s. Wow, that was decent. But I've read descriptions of what happens with birth. People talk about birth as like. So I'm going to assume that it's accurate, assuming I've never gone through it. Don't expect that I ever will, Mr. Lynch. Think so. Yeah, it's violent. You're pulling the kid out of the uterus, which in the process tears, not the uterus, but tears, all the whatchamacallit, the connecting stuff, the umbilical cord, and when it's connected to in the uterus, they call it the afterbirth. I know that, sure, there's a medical term for it that some of you would know. But that all comes pulled out after the baby. They don't seem to ever show that in like movies and stuff. They show, here's the baby, and let me see that baby, and there's the beautiful baby. They don't show all the gunk that comes out after it. Or my water break. Well, it's urine actually. The baby is peeing urine. Where do you think the baby's going to the bathroom? No, it's not. It's not water. It's water, but it's it's not. Yeah. Anyways, so so there's violence. The woman's hips are pushed apart. okay? They're pulled apart so that the birth canal can be widened. And then, hopefully the baby's head comes out, not its feet or something else. That's a disaster. But if it comes out the right way, baby, still, the skin of the vagina can tear, usually does tears open, because the opening, of course, is still not wide enough. You've got a small human being coming through a small opening, okay? So there'll be tearing. And there are levels, how bad the tears are, so you have to be aware of that, especially after birth. So a woman can start bleeding out if she has significant lacerations from the birth of the baby. So it's not, I don't think, an unviolent experience, right? And does baby come out with a smile? Yeah, usually the first sound from the baby is crying, which is usually, we don't interpret as a happy sound, right, Ms. Park? Usually crying, maybe you can cry for joy, but I don't think the baby's a happy cry. I don't think so. I could ask the baby, and see what the baby says, but it doesn't seem to be. But so, yeah, violence is an essential part of who we are. We enter the world through violence. Even the sexual act, in some way, you could argue, is violent. Go back to the beginning. The act of sex. Yes, it's pleasurable, but can also cause a woman to bleed. You can also, it can be violent. If it's done right. But if it's not done right, then it can cause, the woman can be bruised, and even, parts of the vagina can bleed. Like the hymen, especially when, usually that's how you tell the person's a virgin or not. The hymen is broken. But the hymen can break for other reasons. A girl plays a lot of athletics and sports and stuff like that from just activity. But okay, fine. That was the traditional way that in tribal cultures and ancient cultures, they would discern if a woman was a virgin so she could get married and whatever. They have someone look for the hymen. Is the hymen intact? If it's not intact, then how did it get broken? But it gets broken. It can get broken in the act of the sexual act. That's true. And bleed. So there's violence even there. Blood in the case of sex. In the creation of another life. So violence is there, I think. It's part of us. So if you ask the question, would people fight to preserve or defend this symbolical system? Would they? I guess they would if they fight for other symbolical systems, People used to go into battle with flags, the flags of their country or their group, right? We don't do that anymore. We put the flags on the uniforms and stuff like that. But yeah, to capture the flag of the opposing army was considered a great thing to do, a great trophy. And, they would fight to the death to protect their flag, getting into the hands of the enemy. It was considered a great disgrace if you lost your that's not what they call it. It's a flag, but what do they call it? I forget the name. Standard. So if people are willing to fight for that, the symbol of their country, I would imagine, yeah, okay. People drawing crosses on their shields and stuff, religious symbology on their weapons and stuff like that. I could see that happening, and it has happened, I know. So throughout history, I would say it makes sense to me that religion and violence have been in close contact. I'm not really surprised at that. I don't know why, as all of a sudden in the modern age or contemporary age, people are suddenly surprised that religion can be intertwined with violence. It involves us. And if it involves us, it involves violence. Eventually, right? what I'm just looking at my notes to see why I wrote this down. Detailed history of this kind of written, yeah, a lot of research on it. Okay, that's from Fritz Graf's article. A lot of what I'm telling you is coming from Fritz Graf in his article. And Graf says that a detailed history of the contact between religion and violence hasn't been written yet. Okay, whatever he means by that. But then again, he was writing many years ago in this Encyclopedia of Religion, the second edition. There is actually, because I got it through my library, an Encyclopedia of Religion and War that has come out. So some people have done academic work on that, of various attitudes of religion towards war, wars that might be considered religious. Well, there's also the Encyclopedia of War, which has a list of a couple hundred religious wars that are classified as specifically religious wars. Talk about that later. So I think that it's starting to be written. I don't think Graf is correct about that. Though he says that, there has been a lot of research about certain epochs or episodes of violence, the Crusades being one of the most famous for Christianity, or jihad for Islam, etc. and so forth. But he doesn't think generally, but I think that's just old information. I think that it's starting to happen, or has started to happen. And many mythologies, many stories, we seem to view violence as a bad thing, Ms. Lazarus, but is it a bad thing? Because a lot of cultures don't see violence as a bad thing. They see violent acts as positive. And in fact, they're necessary. They're necessary. It was necessary, Mr. Saunders, for the doctor to tear you out of your mother. Could have just left you there. Could have just let it happen when your body starts trying to expel you. All of us, I should say. Could have just let it go, follow its natural course, and you would have just popped out, I mean, women have done it before, many, many millions of women throughout the history of our species without the aid of doctors or midwives, But it does also go wrong, very wrong, when you can't get the child out and the child might die in utero. You've got a corpse in the uterus, which of course can infect the mother and kill her. Or you can have it could be a normal birth that just goes normally, but like I said, with the tearing of the wall, the skin of the vagina, the vaginal or the birth canal, if a woman bleeds out from it, she can die. So even a normal birth could still be dangerous, can still be dangerous. So you tear it, you rip it out, you grab the thing, you grab the head of the baby, and you pull it gently but firmly, you guide it out of the uterus, yeah? It's necessary. You can't just leave it there. I mean, you could and let nature take its course. And as I said, in the hundreds of thousands of years of our species, obviously, most of it without modern medicine, right? Ms. Jasmine, women have had to just deal with that. Once the muscles start contracting and it's ready for the fetus to come out, baby's ready, body knows it, starts pushing, you ain't putting it back in. Body isn't going to stop. All right, that's nature. So the violence is kind of necessary to help out, to help along the way, to get the baby out. And it's also positive because you have a newborn life, you have a new human being. The mother is fine, hopefully. There weren't any complications, but the mother, will recover from the birth. And so that's a positive, and you have a new human life, which is apparently what was intended, apparently, assuming that the mother and the father wanted another kid. Let's hope. Well, you never know. Well, you don't know how the kid's going to turn out, So in that case, the violence is both positive and necessary. It's not bad. In fact, it's useful. If I've got a rotten tooth in my mouth you know? Yeah, it's going to hurt real bad for someone to tie a string around it or get some pliers if this was like, the 1500s or something. When there was no modern dentistry or antiseptic or anesthesia. But, if I have an infected tooth that's killing, which I did once, which was killing me, really painful. I don't care that it's going to take violence. There's going to be blood and pain, but then it will be out. And the lesser pain I could endure rather than the pain of the infected tooth, which could then infect my body if it got into my rest of my body and could kill me if it's a severe enough infection. So again, there's violence that happens that is positive violence and necessary. You want it. You want surgery if something needs to be taken out, a tumor or something. So you accept that. So is violence necessary? Someone doing violence, is that necessarily a bad thing? In the ancient world, no, not so much. Or not necessarily. And we see this in the foundation myths of religion. So for example, the foundation of the cosmic order, of the creation of the world, for example. This figure called Marduk. Marduk, ancient god of Babylon. Ancient god of Babylon, modern day Iraq. Marduk was worshipped in ancient Babylon. And in the story, I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but and a lot, and this happens a lot in the creation stories of a lot of religions, especially the old religions, that there's creation through violence. Creation happens usually through war and bloodshed, the creation of the universe. And it's no different here with the story of Marduk. Marduk is he's the god of Babylon, but how does he become a god? Well, he engages in battle with this great kind of sea monster called Tiamat. I'm going to show you where. Let's see here. Where am I? There we are. All right. There we go. Country of Iraq. That's where ancient Babylon was. And down here in the south was the city of Babylon. Okay? And that's where this Marduk myth comes from, this kind of mythology. So yeah, there was this goddess or female kind of sea monster, Tiamat. I think they had a god of salt water and a god of fresh water. I think she was the god of salt water, Tiamat. Anyways. And I think someone killed her husband, who was the god of fresh water, I think, if I remember. But anyways, the Tiamat, there's a war with this goddess Tiamat, who's kind of like a sea monster. Okay? And Marduk, all the gods are scared to death of Tiamat. None of them think they can defeat her because she's just too big and too powerful. And so they're scared to death. So they find some brave man or brave person who will go fight Tiamat for them. And Marduk presents himself. But Marduk has a condition. He's like, if I defeat Tiamat, I want to be the head god. I'm like, okay, we'll make you the head god. Okay, so he does. He goes out, he fights Tiamat, and he kills her. Violence. A war, a battle. Killing, fighting, killing. He also kills one of her generals, who's called Kingu. Kingu. And in this representation, this picture of Marduk that I have on the PowerPoint, I believe he's riding on the back of Tiamat. Don't quote me on that, because I have a memory that some archaeologists say, no, we're not sure it's actually Tiamat. You might see this on the internet, but I'm okay with it. I think it's fine. This is Tiamat on the waters. Okay, Marduk is standing on top of it. Okay, as king of the gods. So what does he do? He takes Tiamat's body. God bless. He takes Tiamat's body, cuts her in two, and makes one half the sky and the other half the earth. And he used Kingu's blood, the blood of one of her generals, Kingu. He uses Kingu's blood to make humans. He takes dirt and he mixes it with the blood of Kingu and forms little creatures. Oh, that sounds familiar. Taking dirt of the earth and breathing life into it and creating man. You heard that story before? But the similar story. No, that's not a scene, sir. Years old. Years old. Anyway, so Kingu, he uses the blood of Kingu to make them. Why? Well, what's the purpose of making human beings? So they can work the earth for the gods. The gods are kind of gotten lazy. They're kind of tired of having to keep the earth in existence and make stuff grow and clean up. So they decide we'll make this little slave creature that will work the earth for us. That's what happens there. So violence, again, violence is how the world was made. That is not, if you do remember your Bible, when you were young maybe, or maybe when you've heard the creation stories from the book of Genesis, the Jewish God is different. It's a similar story. So the Jews know these stories, and they kind of embrace them to some extent to tell their own beliefs about God. But they make very interesting changes in how they describe the story. First of all, there is no war. In the beginning, God created the sky and the earth, the sky and the land. That's how the Bible opens in the book of Genesis, chapter 1. There's no war, no opposition. God just goes about his business creating. Very different idea from a lot of ancient cultures. God doesn't have to fight this sea monster. He doesn't fight a sea monster and kill it in order to create things, to establish his superiority over the gods like Marduk does. He's simply God always. Nothing resists him. However, if you read earlier parts of the Bible, what scholars believe are earlier parts of the Bible, places like in the book of Psalms and stuff like that, which are probably older than the story in Genesis chapter 1, you do have that idea of God defeating the watery serpent, Leviathan, the ancient serpent. God makes it, but he doesn't kill it. He makes it his pet. So even there's a difference. The Jewish God doesn't kill this water serpent, the sea monster. He subdues it and makes it like his pet, like his little dog, his friend, his puppy dog. Play with it. So even there's a difference. So you see that even that ancient idea of even in Judaism, that ancient idea of defeating the sea monster, Middle Eastern idea of the defeat of the sea monster in the creation of the world, that pokes its face out every now and then in the old ancient texts of Jews. But in later developed thought, nothing opposes the God of Israel. So there is no sea monster. That's been edited out of the story as it's retold. No, God is all powerful. He doesn't have to fight anybody. So in the Jewish creation story, this is interesting. It's anti-violence, right? There is no violence. God simply speaks and things come into existence, right? There's no fight. There's no opposition. You don't think so? What do you think, Ms. Rogers? Think I'm wrong? Yeah, there's no violence in the Bible's creation story, like we find in just about every other religious text about the creation of the world. There's no war or battle.
Yeah, but then how is Satan existing?
Satan doesn't. There is no Satan. There is no evil to oppose God. God is simply all good. Violent, and if you read the book of Genesis, the Bible, when does violence appear? It appears not from God's end. It appears from the human being's end. Human beings disobey God's law. And that's when the killing starts. Not by God, but humans start killing each other. And God has to figure out what to do about this. It's part of like the first 8 chapters of the book of Genesis are like one long story trying to explain this dilemma for God. He's created this creature that, is killing everything. They're killing each other. So God decides, well, you know what? I'm just going to have to wipe the slate clean and start over. And that's where we get the story of Noah and his ark, where God wipes out every man, woman, child, and animal on the planet, except for the best he could find, which was Noah. Doesn't mean Noah was great. That was the best he could find out of the human beings that were there. But it doesn't start with the God, whereas in other religions, interestingly enough, it does. There's a war between these opposing gods, and one is victorious over the other, and usually uses the body or the stuff of the other to create the stuff in the universe. Okay, and other stories, like stories from the East, like India and Japan and stuff like that, places like that, I forget what demon it is, well, anyways, I just remember, like the eyes will be used as of the defeated creature become the sun, or one eye becomes the sun, one eye becomes the moon. They dissect the whole body, and the different body parts become different explanations of where these different things came from. Planets, the moon, various satellites like the moon and the sun, stars, the oceans, mountains. Okay, they're the part of the body. That's why you have sacred mountains all over the place. A lot of times they're parts of the body of the creature that was cut up at the beginning of time to create the universe, the world, but not in the Jewish story. Interesting, I think. If we talk about Christianity, violence, right there, the crucifixion, Jesus on the cross, the Christian God sends his son to die. Or does he? Some people can describe Christianity as kind of like a death cult that's surrounded, go into some Christian churches and they have crosses all over the place, right? Yeah. Oh, we have a cross on the wall there. I think that's just to keep the federal government out of our hair. Listen. Let's go, Mr. Saunders. That bad, really? I'm that off today? Sorry, Mr. Saunders. I'm trying. Yeah, you can see it that way. God sends his son to die, okay? To be killed. But actually, let's look at it another way. Because you see, actually the message of Christianity is quite different than that. And I know even a lot of Christians take it that way. Jesus died for me, paid my price, paid the price for my sins. He took the punishment that was due to me. That's very violent imagery, right? Violent. But if you think about it, that's not really what happens. What happens is Jesus comes, the Son of God, and he's killed by humans. He's a victim. Okay, yes, Christians will try to shoehorn it into a plan, but that's trying to figure out a reason for what happened. I don't care about the reason. Why did Jesus die? That's a whole other question. We could talk about that in Christian faith class if you want to take it with me. Want to do like a religious studies minor or, maybe even a double major, Ms. Cook. Why not? Take the major that will get you a job and take religious studies or philosophy as a second major. Huh? You don't have to. Or you can, take on extra load if you can. I'm just saying, throwing it out there. Not saying, Ms. Park, that you have to. But all it is really that like Jesus is there and he's killed. Why he's killed is a whole other question. But Jesus doesn't do anything violent to get himself killed. He doesn't, he doesn't gather an army. He doesn't try to overthrow the Roman oppressors of the Jews at the time. He doesn't try to destroy the temple or anything. He's not violent. From all the perspectives we have of Jesus of Nazareth, he was non-violent for the most part. So how does he get killed? The story of Christianity is actually the opposite. The triumph of God over violence of people, over the violence of human beings. When we sometimes kill bad people or kill good people. Whether we should kill bad people is another question. But certainly we all can agree, don't kill good people. People who are trying to do good just because they're good, but that happens all the time. Martin Luther King, Jesus, Gandhi, Socrates. For Graff, he thinks that the major factor to this dark side of religion, the violent side of religion, is the tradition of reading sacred books and sacred writings to find models for behavior. Okay? So, for example, especially in the Judeo-Christian religion and influenced religion, so Judaism and Christianity and then Islam doesn't come directly from them, but is significantly influenced by those two religions. And they all share this, in Graff's view, they share this idea of we look to the sacred book for what is our ethically correct behavior, which maybe we shouldn't do, but whatever, people do. I know him. I'm a 3-year-old, Mr. Sanders. I don't know why you put up with me, Ms. Jasmine. Ms. Jasmine, have you smiled yet today? You smiled? Good. Do at least one smile for yourself today. Yeah, so people look like in the book of Joshua in the Bible, and it talks about, God wants, I have given you this land of Palestine or Canaan, and so, it's yours, so go and settle it. Well, but there are people living there already. Well, it's fine, wipe them out. If they won't leave peacefully, kill them, go to war against them. Don't worry, I'm the Lord, I'm with you. Okay, that's the story in a nutshell. What happens when I see Graff's point? What happens when someone living now in 2025 tries to read that as a description of ethical behavior and not just a description of what people did, This happened, but it might not be actually telling you that it should happen. It's just telling you it happened. But someone reads it as like, oh, so is this opening the door to genocide? Is this condoned? Can I defend it then? And if you go on the internet, I've seen some very smart people, smart Christians, and much smarter than I am, defending these stories of genocide in the Bible. Well, God can do what he wants. God's the giver of life and the taker of life, and he can decide how that's going to happen. Okay. All right, it's an argument. I don't think it's a great argument. Has some logic to it. Maybe people, I don't know. I have to think about it some more, I guess. So, Graff's point is, well, we can't deny these stories. You can't just look at all the other good stuff that religion does. I know, and some of you have said that in class. You admit that, well, yeah, there's violence, but religion does a whole bunch of other good things. Okay, that's fine. I agree with you on that. I've known that personally. But I also know that religion can also do bad things, and it doesn't really address that issue. It just kind of moves it to, well, look at the good stuff. Don't look at the genocide. Look at the serving the poor and building hospitals. Okay. But but why is there that disconnect? Why do you have a religion, say, for example, say Christianity, that builds hospitals to help the sick and suffering, has soup kitchens to feed the poor, help the, hostels to, for homeless, but it also has prisons for heretics, you know, and crusades and stuff like that. How do you, love your enemy and help your enemy, but kill your enemy? How are these going together here? Right? Just looking at the good stuff and not looking at, say, the bad stuff that's there. How are they justified logically in your system? Okay. So Graff gets into violence and the difference of violence according to religion. He starts talking about monotheistic religions, and monotheism just simply means the belief in one God. Monos means single or one. Theos, as we know, means God. Yes, we talked about religion. Theos, divine. Theos, God. So a single God, there's one God. Monotheism. And polus means many in Greek, so many gods. Many gods. Polytheism, to believe in multiple gods. And there are varieties of theisms. Like, for example, monotheism says it's simply the belief in one God, Mr. Gaines. That doesn't mean you don't acknowledge the existence of other gods, but you might still be a monotheist, still defined as a monotheist, if you believe there's one main God who should only be worshipped, and there might be lesser gods and stuff like that. Okay, so there are varieties of monotheism, and there are varieties of polytheism and stuff like that. Just so you know, but simply put, monotheism, one God, belief in one God, polytheism, belief in many. Graff thinks that questions of violence for monotheistic religions are more complicated. So religions like Judaism, Christianity, which comes out of Judaism, actually with Judaism, they're basically two branches of the one Judaism. And then, as I said, Islam, which is influenced by Judaism and Christianity, all believe in the one only God. They're very monotheistic religions. And so for Graff, the question of violence becomes more complicated and controversial. Why? I can't scream anymore, Mr. Moon, so why, Mr. Clinch? Because I guess you could say you've only got one God to blame. Really, there's only one God to blame. Okay, as basically it. For monotheistic religions, both justice, I guess, in doing good, you could say, and war or violence or doing bad are placed in the hands of the one God that you believe in. So one God is responsible. Has to be. Like you said, Satan, right? Oh, no, you said Satan, Ms. Rogers. Satan. God created Satan, right? Where's Satan fit into the creation story? Or Satan's in the creation. But that one God gets all the blame. I mean, if God creates the world and there's both good and evil, and there's only one God to blame, not another God that you could say, okay, that's an evil God that we're dealing with, there's no opposition, then that's a puzzle for monotheistic religions, the question of evil, and it becomes a question for violence. Critics would say there are two main characteristics of monotheistic religions that makes them possibly violent, that embeds violence into their structure. So some argue, I'm not, but some argue that monotheistic religions actually lean more towards a violent side than, say, polytheistic religions. Why? Well, for two reasons. Their idea of revelation, and the idea of universalism. This idea of universalism. All right, so I didn't do as great as I wanted to, but anyways. My alarm went off, so I guess I'll end it here and see you on Tuesday. God bless you all. Have a good day, sir. Everybody, enjoy yourselves. Good days. Yeah, she was here. Have a good day, miss. Thanks. Have a good day, Mr. Saunders. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
So there's no paper. That was a mistake.
There's no paper?
Did you send an email that was like,
Oh, yeah, we have no paper for this course, just quizzes and a final exam. Sorry for the confusion. Bye, Miss Ying.